tell you a little bit about the Alexander Hamilton Society, for those who don't know us. Our mission, we're a 501c3 non-profit, nonpartisan organization, and our mission is to identify, educate, and launch young men and young women into the foreign policy and national security world, imbued with what we call Hamiltonian values. And I could wax philosophically, academically, politically about what that means, but fundamentally it means a deep belief in American exceptionalism, a deep belief that we have a special role to play in the world, and that American leadership, support for American defense, and support for free societies around the world is a core part and makes us safer, freer, and more prosperous as those well around us. We have over 80 chapters on college campuses where we do most of our work, where we send out scholars, thinkers, practitioners to actually debate college professors on issues of foreign policy and national security. And that chapter forms the basis of a really wonderful talent work. Many of you who are here tonight were part of that, that comes into Washington. And so we have 1,900 alumni and 700 of whom work in Washington, D.C., across the U.S. government a whole lot of different ways on both foreign policy and domestic policy. If you're interested in learning more about our work, you can go to www.alexanderhamiltonsociety.org. Tonight, our discussion really centers on an issue that is critical to actually our own mission, not just any old foreign policy issue, which is to the quality of education our students are receiving at their universities. And in addition to the, I hate to say it, but many self-inflicted damages that a lot of universities do to the type of education that they are providing their students, our universities have also become battlegrounds in the competition with our adversaries. This is not a new phenomenon. We saw it during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and frankly, we saw it quite a lot during the War on Terror era. But I think we are now only beginning to fully recognize it in relation to the Chinese Communist Party.
And I think what's most special right now, just to reiterate what Gabe was saying, is that these two lawmakers are actually really right in the center of that, especially with the release of their joint committee report today on research security and China. We're going to dig into that in a minute, but I really want to start, I think more broadly with you, Chairwoman Foxx. Your committee really has been at the forefront of university accountability, especially since October 7 of last year, with everything from addressing anti-Semitism on campuses, the campus protests, the response by university administrations, but also big issues like Chinese influence and questionable partnerships. Can you start us off with some opening thoughts or framing remarks just on the question of how serious the current threat of malign foreign influence in American higher education is, and what's actually at stake here? Why is this such an important issue? And also, how has the landscape changed in the last 5 or 10 years?
Well, first, I want to thank you and the Alexander Hamilton Society, the Washington Times, for holding this event tonight. I do think it's very important that we keep a focus on what is happening in the university systems and across universities in the country. You know, I've said for a long, long time that this should be the most exciting time to be involved in education in the world, because the opportunities out there for education are so great. We have online education, we have every form of education that you can imagine. And the American university system has always been seen as the crown jewel of university systems. The universities here are the places that everybody has wanted to come to from all over the world. But I fear greatly right now that our university systems, in terms of the malign powers that you mentioned, have become perhaps a liability because they've been infiltrated so much by people who are teaching things that are antithetical to what the Hamilton Society believes in, certainly, that we are an exceptional country, that we are an exceptional people, that we are a shining light on the hill.
The Joint Committee report released today, the summary was leaked early in the day. I wrote about about it at the Washington Times. I know the New York Times covered it. It got quite a splash. The report eye-openingly uncovers how hundreds of U.S. universities are working with blacklisted Chinese institutions that are blacklisted by the Commerce Department. It found hundreds of millions of dollars flowing from U.S. taxpayers' research into China on really sensitive military technical research. Like hypersonics, nuclear weapons tech. This is the first time that either of you will have spoken about it publicly. This is a pretty big report. Tell us about it and maybe what the impetus for this report was.
And so what we found is that a lot of the research that is being done under this joint venture, if you will, is benefiting the military. And of course, we know that the Chinese Communist Party is becoming more aggressive at home and around the world, and is using every means to infiltrate our institutions and really disrupt our way of life. So that was the impetus. We looked at a number of different universities. In one case, Georgia Tech had partnered for 10 years in a joint educational venture with a university that was actually blacklisted. And what we found is there was research going on, you know, in sophisticated technology areas. You know, you can think of AI, advanced physics, all these applications that can be used for military purposes that could actually be used against American servicemen and women. Not only Georgia Tech, you know, Berkeley was listed as one of the entities. Now, I want to point out that both of those institutions, since this report came to light and since they worked with our committee on these findings, they recognize the problem associated with these affiliations and have broken off those affiliations. But there's still, as you pointed out, close to 24 more joint educational ventures that directly benefit the military of the Chinese Communist Party.
The report definitely digs into specifically these joint institutes that have universities in China that are getting access to U.S. research and money. I want to try to understand that the report does not explicitly say that any laws were broken, right? So what is being done to stop this, and how is it that there aren't any laws on the books to try and address this?
Well, that is a huge concern, because you're right. It is not illegal for a professor at a university to collaborate with the People's Liberation Army, which is shocking when you think of that. So what we are advocating is really tightening the guardrails in terms of what is legal, what is not, what taxpayer dollars, especially defense dollars, can be used for in terms of the types of partnerships and educational arrangements. But you know, it's something where the universities have a mindset that this is contributing to the knowledge base of humanity, but they don't realize that because of the dual-use technologies and the adverse effects that can happen from this, that they're actually helping to support our military inferiority.
Chairwoman Foxx, you've been a major proponent of the Deterrent Act, which actually passed the House last year, and it's sitting in the Senate now awaiting action. What would the Deterrent Act do if it's made into law? And is there anything you can tell us about the status on the Senate side?
The Deterrent Act stands for Defending Education Transparency and Ending Rogue Regimes Engaging in Nefarious Transactions. What the Deterrent Act does is strengthen Section 117 of the Foreign Gift Reporting Requirements in the Higher Education Act. It's not very strong now, but the Deterrent Act would make it much stronger. Right now, under Section 117, universities have to report a gift of $250,000 or more, which is, a good bit of money, and only coming to the universities. So what we've done with the Deterrent Act is we have tightened it up considerably. So first, it lowers the minimum foreign gift reporting threshold from $250,000 to $50,000. But for countries of concern, that's North Korea, Iran, China, and Russia, any amount that is given is supposed to be reported. We closed the loopholes that allowed the foreign entities to donate money to hide, number one, the origin or purpose of their gifts. So every disclosure must include the intended purpose, the dates, and person at the institution responsible for accepting the gift.
I think people in the general public, and I know we have a very informed audience with Alexander Hamilton Society, but one of the issues that really brought back to the China influence here was the issue of Confucius Institutes. These are basically institutes on campuses in the United States that are funded by entities tied back to the Chinese Communist Party that the U.S. State Department has called out. Both of you have called out. Back in 2020, the State Department basically strongly urged universities to take a hard look at Confucius Institutes. These are institutes that were accused of spying on the Chinese diaspora, Chinese students with visas to study here, faculty. I want to try to just unpack that a little bit because I know you both are on top of it, but sometimes I think people don't understand what was China actually doing with the Confucius Institutes.
Well, first thing I want to do is give a shout out to Joe Wilson from South Carolina. Mm-hmm. Joe, I don't know, probably 10 years ago, started highlighting the dangers of the Confucius Institute. I can't remember the exact year that he did it, but Joe said the Confucius Institutes are malign institutes and something needs to be done about them. He had a hard time getting people to pay attention. But what they've tried to do is subtly and not so subtly change the way people think about China and have people think about China in positive ways.
And I think it's important to note that what the CCP does, whether it's at home or abroad, is uses leverage. And they will leverage people in this country. If they're Chinese, they will leverage them and they will try and get them to get information. And the reason people are vulnerable is that the Chinese national security laws require anyone to collaborate with the CCP. And if they don't, they are in violation of the national security law, no matter what soil they're on. So we have heard as a committee stories of students who were from Hong Kong and were being, transnational repression, being bullied, being intimidated. We've heard about the police stations in New York and other locations being used to intimidate the Chinese diaspora. So, we love the Chinese people. It's the Chinese Communist Party that is the malign influence.
There's kind of an elephant in the room with that, which is we've been talking about awareness at universities and in university administrations, but what about within the U.S. defense community and at the Pentagon? And what can you tell us about the thinking there?
I think this needs to be a huge wake-up call. When you look at the funding that we do, whether it's defense dollars or even energy grants and research, and we've in the appropriations process have really tried to restrict our dollars from going to entities of concern, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. And it's shocking when you see these grants, whether it's energy, defense, others, National Science Foundation, that are partnering with entities of concern.
Right.
And so I do think it's a wake-up call for and I think our defense and our intelligence community has a growing awareness and concern about this, and recognize that, it's our men and women on the front lines in our military who will be directly affected by this if we get this wrong.
Sir, thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Wendell Bryant. I'm from the Institute of World Politics. The United States has been leading the world as the apex nation for some 35 years. At the top, I believe the American body politic has grown apathetic and stagnant to external threats. How do we invigorate the American people to confront this growing concern before it becomes something more than a conversation?
President Reagan was very committed to the Allies and working with the Allies. Japan at that time, West Germany. He had his sort of group, Margaret Thatcher, working together, Brian Mulroney from Canada. And so at the same time, he was really leading when it came to competing with the Soviet Union economically, militarily. He was also building these friendships, these alliances, these partnerships. I don't think we've ever had a time where our relationship with Japan is closer and needs to be closer. And South Korea, and you look at the Philippines, we're building relationships there. I think we need to keep growing that, because I think what the American people are weary of is they feel like America's going alone in this, and all these dollars are being spent, and they don't see the sort of this allied effort. And so I think that's a big part of it. And we need to be clear about what our objectives are. And that's the other key thing. And so our select committee talks about our winning this strategic competition with the Chinese Communist Party. And it truly is a competition. And basically the international rules-based order that we've all benefited from is at stake with this, because they have a very different idea of what the future looks like. And you can see it through their creating indebtedness around the world, and through their Belt and Road initiatives. They're becoming more aggressive militarily, ignoring boundaries and threatening their neighbors. So I think you're right, we need to keep making people aware of the situation we have, but I think we have to give them the confidence that this is not a solo effort on our part. This is people who are like-minded countries working together because we want to protect what we've all benefited from.
Hi, my name's Catherine Clark. I'm a contractor for USAID. I'm curious, are there lessons from history you can learn of the United States Cold War with Russia? Were there comparable influence efforts by the Russian state to influence American higher education at that time? And if so, are there lessons learned we have from that time period that we can learn from in the present?
President Reagan, when he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild, experienced dealing with communism and in Hollywood. And that created an awareness on his part of sort of the dangers of that. And so I think throughout his life, he was very much an advocate for our way of life, the freedoms that we enjoy, limited government, actually the things that you all stand for at the Alexander Hamilton Society. And that was very much ingrained. And I think, universities at that time, I think he was aware of influences there. But, I think this could be an overstatement, but it seems like Russia's influence operation was more covert, and it was sort of in centers like Washington, D.C., New York, maybe at key places. What China's doing is really trying to infiltrate every aspect of the private sector, every kind of across the board, universities, and then the cultural, and they're being very deceptive about it, but the influence is much, and the dependency that we have economically on them, and the dependency that other nations have on them makes it much more complicated, I believe, than we had with Russia. So I think that requires kind of an all hands on deck to really focus on what has made America unique, what have we benefited from in the free world, how can we align with countries around the world that really want to pursue that, and then build from there, because China has so much influence economically, now militarily, that we need to win the argument, but we also need to win economically and militarily when it comes to this competition. So that's it. I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned. I would say his relentless focus on calling out the Soviet Union for what it was. I mean, the State Department was really trying to get him not to say, tear down this wall. He did. And, so there's always going to be that tension. You don't want to be provocative, but at the same time, you want to speak truthfully and really get the issues out there. And I think he did a great job with that.